At the close of the 13th century, the political landscape of Anatolia was a world in transition. Powerful kingdoms that had once dominated the region were weakening, old alliances were breaking apart, and new rulers were emerging from places that few people at the time would have considered important. It was an age shaped by migration, warfare, opportunity, and uncertainty. Across the countryside, authority had become fragmented. The mighty Seljuk Sultanate of Rome, which had ruled much of Anatolia for generations, had never truly recovered from the devastating Mongol invasions of the previous century. Its authority had faded, its institutions had weakened, and its territory had fractured into numerous independent principalities ruled by Turkish military leaders known as beys. These principalities, often called beyliks, competed constantly with one another. Some were large and wealthy. Others controlled only a handful of towns and villages. They formed a patchwork of rival states, each hoping to expand its influence while navigating the shifting balance of power created by the Mongols to the east and the Byzantine Empire to the west. Among these many frontier states stood one that appeared, at first glance, to have little chance of becoming anything more than a local power. It occupied a relatively small territory near the Byzantine frontier in northwestern Anatolia. Its leader was not known as a king or emperor. He was simply a bey named Osman. Few people living during Osman's lifetime could have imagined what would eventually grow from his modest domain. His territory was neither the richest nor the largest among the Turkish principalities. It lacked the prestige of older dynasties and possessed none of the monumental cities that often symbolize political power. Yet history is not always shaped by those who begin with the greatest advantages. Sometimes it is determined by those who recognize opportunities that others overlook. The frontier where Osman ruled was unlike the stable heartlands of established kingdoms. It was a constantly changing borderland where different cultures, religions, and political traditions met. Muslim Turkish settlers lived alongside Christian farming communities. Byzantine fortresses overlooked valleys where Turkish nomads grazed their animals. Trade routes crossed contested territory, carrying merchants, pilgrims, and travelers between Asia and Europe. In such an environment, military skill alone was not enough. Success depended on flexibility, diplomacy, and the ability to attract followers. Osman inherited leadership from his father, Ertugrul, who had served as a frontier commander during the final years of Seljuk influence. Although many stories about Ertugrul and Osman were later embellished by Ottoman chroniclers seeking to glorify the dynasty's origins, historians generally agree that Osman emerged as an independent ruler around the end of the 13th century. The year 1299 has traditionally been regarded as the symbolic founding date of the Ottoman state. While the exact circumstances remain debated, it marks the period when Osman began acting independently of the fading Seljuk authorities. Rather than attempting to confront powerful enemies directly, Osman focused on gradual expansion. He targeted vulnerable Byzantine settlements scattered along the frontier. These communities often received little support from Constantinople, whose own empire had been shrinking for generations. Local governors struggled to defend isolated fortresses with limited manpower and declining financial resources. Osman recognized these weaknesses and moved carefully to exploit them. His campaigns were not conducted through overwhelming force. Instead, they combined military raids, negotiated agreements, strategic marriages, and carefully cultivated alliances. Warriors seeking land, wealth, or religious purpose increasingly gathered around him. Many were known as Ghazis, frontier fighters who viewed warfare against Byzantine territories as both an opportunity for advancement and an expression of religious commitment. Yet the frontier itself was more complicated than later legends sometimes suggest. Cooperation between Muslim and Christian communities remained common, and alliances often crossed religious boundaries when political interests aligned. As Osman's influence expanded, his following grew larger. Every successful campaign brought additional land to distribute among loyal supporters. Every captured settlement strengthened his reputation. This cycle of conquest and reward attracted even more experienced fighters, creating momentum that distinguished his principality from many neighboring beyliks that remained trapped in local rivalries. Geography also favored his ambitions. Northwestern Anatolia stood directly opposite the weakening Byzantine territories of Bithynia. Unlike central Anatolia, where Turkish principalities competed fiercely against one another, the western frontier offered room for expansion at the expense of an empire struggling to defend its remaining possessions. Osman did not need to defeat powerful Turkish rivals immediately. Instead, he could expand steadily into territories whose defenses were becoming increasingly fragile. Military victories alone, however, could not create a lasting state. Osman understood that conquered lands needed permanent settlement if they were to remain secure. Turkish families were encouraged to move into newly acquired villages. Agricultural production increased. Trade routes became safer under stable administration. These developments transformed temporary military gains into lasting political control. This process distinguished Osman's leadership from that of many contemporary frontier commanders. Some leaders excelled at raiding, but failed to establish enduring institutions. Osman increasingly demonstrated that his ambitions extended beyond simple conquest. He was laying the foundations for a permanent ruling dynasty. One of the most famous stories associated with Osman emerged long after his death, yet it played a profound role in shaping Ottoman identity. According to later tradition, Osman experienced a remarkable dream while staying in the home of a respected religious figure named Sheikh Bali. In the dream, a moon rose from the chest of the sheikh and entered Osman's own body. From Osman's chest then grew an enormous tree whose branches spread across the world, providing shade to mountains, rivers, cities, and countless peoples. Modern historians generally regard this account as symbolic rather than historical. It reflects how later generations understood the extraordinary expansion of the Ottoman dynasty rather than documenting an actual event. Nevertheless, the story reveals something important about Ottoman political culture. As the empire grew into one of history's greatest powers, its chroniclers sought to portray its origins as part of a larger historical and spiritual destiny. By the early years of the 14th century, Osman's campaigns had brought increasing pressure against some of the Byzantine Empire's most important remaining cities in northwestern Anatolia. Among them stood Bursa, a prosperous urban center whose capture would transform the fortunes of the emerging Ottoman state. Although Osman initiated the siege, he did not live to witness its conclusion. As he grew older, leadership gradually passed to his son Orhan, who had already proven himself capable both on the battlefield and in administration. Around the year 1326, Osman died, leaving behind something far more significant than the territory he personally controlled. He had created a dynasty, His descendants would continue to rule for more than 6 centuries. His name, Osman, would become the foundation for the state's identity. In Turkish, his followers became known as the Osmanli. Across Europe, they came to be known as the Ottomans. For a ruler who had begun as the leader of one relatively small frontier principality, this legacy was extraordinary. Yet Osman's achievements represented only the beginning. The state he founded still remained modest compared with the great empires surrounding it. Its institutions were only beginning to take shape. Its administrative structures were still developing. Its military system would require further refinement. Most importantly, its ambitions had not yet reached beyond the frontiers of Anatolia. That transformation would occur under Orhan. Unlike his father, Orhan inherited not merely a struggling frontier domain, but a political movement already gathering momentum. He understood that military victories needed to be matched by administrative organization if Ottoman expansion was to continue. His reign would therefore become one of transition, carrying the Ottoman state from the world of tribal frontier politics towards something much closer to an organized kingdom. The first major achievement of Orhan's rule came almost immediately. In 1326, after years of sustained pressure, Bursa finally surrendered to the Ottomans. Its capture changed everything. Unlike the scattered villages and frontier fortresses that Osman had conquered, Bursa was a flourishing urban center with established markets, workshops, religious institutions, and commercial networks. Possessing such a city dramatically altered the nature of Ottoman rule. Instead of governing primarily through mobile frontier warfare, the Ottomans now possessed an administrative capital capable of supporting long-term government. Bursa soon became the first true Ottoman capital. From there, Orhan strengthened taxation, expanded judicial administration, encouraged commerce, and invested in urban development. Mosques, schools, markets, baths, and charitable foundations appeared throughout the growing city. These projects demonstrated that Ottoman authority extended beyond conquest into governance. The Ottoman state was becoming more sophisticated. At the same time, Orhan continued expanding militarily. Rather than relying entirely on tribal warriors who joined campaigns voluntarily, he began developing more permanent military structures. Although the famous Janissary Corps would not reach its mature form until later generations, the foundations of a standing military establishment began during his reign. This gradual shift toward disciplined professional forces would become one of the defining strengths of the Ottoman Empire. Diplomacy also played an increasingly important role. The Byzantine Empire remained weakened not only by external threats, but by repeated internal civil wars. Rival claimants frequently competed for the imperial throne, seeking allies wherever they could find them. On several occasions, Byzantine factions invited Ottoman military assistance against their own domestic rivals. One such alliance brought Orhan into close contact with Emperor John VI Cangazinos. To strengthen political ties, Orhan married the emperor's daughter, Theodora. Such marriages remind us that medieval politics rarely followed simple religious divisions. Muslim and Christian rulers often cooperated when strategic interests aligned. These relationships would have consequences far beyond immediate diplomacy. During Byzantine internal conflicts, Ottoman troops crossed the Dardanelles into Europe to support their allies. In 1352, they secured control of the fortress of Simp on the Gallipoli Peninsula. It was a seemingly limited territorial gain. In reality, it marked one of the most important turning points in Ottoman history. For the first time, the Ottomans possessed a permanent foothold in Europe. This new position opened possibilities that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Across the Balkans, political fragmentation resembled conditions that had previously favored Ottoman expansion in Anatolia. Kingdoms competed against one another. Noble families pursued rival ambitions. Byzantine influence continued to decline. Frontier regions often lacked effective centralized defense. The Ottomans recognized another historic opportunity. Instead of treating Europe as the destination of occasional military expeditions, they began establishing permanent settlements. Turkish families migrated across the straits. Garrisons secured newly conquered towns. Roads linked expanding territories. Administrative officials followed soldiers into recently occupied regions. Conquest became colonization. Colonization became administration. Administration became enduring rule. When Orhan died during the early 1360s, the Ottoman state had undergone a remarkable transformation. It was no longer merely a successful frontier principality. It had become an emerging regional power stretching across two continents. Its armies now operated in both Anatolia and southeastern Europe. Its rulers governed major cities rather than isolated fortresses. Its institutions continued to evolve with every passing decade. The foundations had been laid, but even greater expansion lay ahead. The next ruler would inherit a state unlike any his grandfather Osman could have imagined. Under Murad I, the Ottomans would cease to be simply one ambitious dynasty among many. They would begin the long journey toward becoming an empire. Murad I inherited a state that had already grown beyond its humble frontier origins. The challenge before him was no longer simply expanding territory. It was transforming a rapidly growing realm into a durable political system capable of governing people from different languages, religions, and traditions. Every new conquest brought fresh opportunities, but it also introduced new administrative problems. The Ottomans could no longer rely solely on the personal authority of a successful frontier leader. They needed institutions that would survive individual rulers, organize military power, collect revenue consistently, and bind together territories separated by mountains, rivers, and even continents. Murad understood that expansion without organization would eventually collapse under its own weight. One of his earliest priorities was strengthening the military. Earlier Ottoman armies had depended heavily on tribal cavalry, frontier volunteers, and warriors drawn by the promise of land and spoils. These forces remained valuable, but they were not always predictable. Loyalty could shift. Tribal politics could interfere with military discipline. As the Ottoman state expanded, Murad increasingly favored forces whose loyalty rested directly with the ruler rather than local power structures. During his reign, the foundations of what would become the Janissary Corps took much clearer shape. The system that later became known as the Devshirme gradually emerged as one of the empire's most distinctive institutions. Christian boys from certain Balkan communities were periodically recruited into imperial service. They were brought to the Ottoman court, converted to Islam, educated, and trained either for military careers or administrative service. Although modern perspectives often view this system through the lens of coercion and forced separation from families, within the Ottoman political structure, it served another purpose as well. It created an elite class whose advancement depended entirely upon service to the Sultan rather than inherited aristocratic privilege. This represented a remarkable departure from many contemporary states. Throughout medieval Europe, military and political authority often remained concentrated within hereditary noble families. The Ottoman system increasingly rewarded personal ability and loyalty to the central government. Many individuals recruited through the Devshirme eventually rose to become generals, provincial governors, diplomats, judges, and even grand viziers. Their careers reflected the empire's growing emphasis on centralized authority. Murad also continued expanding Ottoman influence across southeastern Europe. One of the most important achievements of his reign came with the capture of Adrianople during the 1360s. Known today as Edirne, the city occupied strategic position between Anatolia and the Balkans. Soon afterward, Murad made it the new Ottoman capital. The decision carried profound symbolic meaning. By relocating the political center closer to Europe, Murad signaled that Ottoman ambitions were no longer confined to Anatolia. Europe had become an essential part of the empire's future. From Edirne, Ottoman armies could move rapidly into Thrace, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Serbia. Roads connected newly conquered territories. Administrative officials followed military commanders. Tax systems expanded. Markets grew. Religious communities continued functioning under Ottoman supervision. Rather than destroying local institutions whenever possible, the Ottomans often preferred adapting them. Many Christian nobles retained limited authority so long as they accepted Ottoman sovereignty, paid tribute, and provided military support when required. Churches generally continued operating. Local legal customs often remained intact for internal community matters. This pragmatic approach reduced resistance while allowing the empire to govern diverse populations without imposing immediate cultural uniformity. It was one of the reasons Ottoman expansion advanced so steadily. Many communities viewed negotiated submission as preferable to prolonged warfare. Still, resistance certainly existed. The growing Ottoman presence alarmed neighboring kingdoms. Serbian rulers recognized that the balance of power was shifting. Bulgarian leaders attempted to organize resistance. Hungarian kings watched developments with increasing concern. Various alliances emerged in hopes of halting Ottoman expansion before it became unstoppable. One of the earliest major confrontations occurred in 1371 at the Battle of Maritsa. Near the banks of the Maritsa River, Ottoman forces faced a much larger Serbian-led army. Despite their numerical disadvantage, the Ottomans launched a surprise night attack that threw the opposing forces into confusion. Many soldiers reportedly drowned while attempting to escape across the river. The defeat shattered organized resistance across much of Macedonia and significantly strengthened Ottoman influence throughout the Balkans. The victory also enhanced Murad's reputation as a capable military commander. Success encouraged additional frontier leaders to join Ottoman service. Every campaign expanded the empire's resources. Every new province supplied taxes, manpower, and strategic positions that supported future expansion. Murad increasingly embraced the title of Sultan. Earlier Ottoman rulers had generally used the title of Bey, emphasizing their status as frontier chieftains. By adopting the title of Sultan more consistently, Murad expressed a broader vision of imperial legitimacy. The Ottoman dynasty no longer saw itself as merely one principality among many. It increasingly claimed authority comparable to the great Islamic states that had preceded it. As Ottoman influence spread, however, conflict became inevitable. The defining battle of Murad's reign unfolded in 1389 on the plain of Kosovo. The armies that gathered there represented competing visions for the future of southeastern Europe. On one side stood the Ottoman forces under Sultan Murad. Opposing them was a coalition led primarily by Serbian Prince Lazar, joined by allies seeking to halt Ottoman expansion before it reached even deeper into Europe. The battle itself proved extraordinarily costly. Contemporary sources often disagree regarding precise troop numbers and tactical details, but historians broadly agree that the fighting was intense and casualties were severe on both sides. The Ottomans ultimately emerged victorious. Yet victory came at a heavy price. After the battle concluded, Murad was assassinated. According to the most widely repeated tradition, a Serbian nobleman named Miloš Obilić gained access to the Sultan under the pretense of surrender before fatally attacking him. The precise historical details remain debated among scholars, but Murad unquestionably died shortly after the battle. He became the first Ottoman Sultan to fall on the battlefield. His death might have thrown the empire into crisis. Instead, the Ottoman leadership acted immediately. Murad's son Bayezid assumed command before uncertainty could spread through the army. The transition occurred so rapidly that discipline remained intact. The victory at Kosovo therefore strengthened rather than weakened Ottoman authority across the Balkans. For many Serbian nobles, continued resistance appeared increasingly unrealistic. Several accepted Ottoman overlordship while retaining local authority under imperial supervision. This pattern would repeat throughout many parts of southeastern Europe over the following decades. Bayezid inherited an empire that was larger than anything his grandfather Osman had ever envisioned. But Bayezid possessed ambitions even greater than those of his father. His speed in both warfare and administration soon earned him the famous nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. The name reflected not only the rapid movement of his armies, but also the pace at which Ottoman expansion accelerated under his rule. Bayezid first focused on securing the Balkans. Potential rivals were either defeated or incorporated into the Ottoman system through vassalage. Christian rulers who accepted Ottoman authority often retained their thrones while paying tribute and supplying troops for imperial campaigns. This flexible arrangement allowed the empire to project power without occupying every territory directly. Once stability had largely been restored in Europe, Bayezid turned eastward. Anatolia remained politically fragmented despite decades of Ottoman growth. Several independent Turkish beyliks still controlled substantial territories. Some had once cooperated with the Ottomans. Others regarded Ottoman expansion as an existential threat. Bayezid resolved to bring them under centralized rule. Campaign after campaign expanded Ottoman authority across western and central Anatolia. The Karamanids, the Germanids, the Aidenids, the Sarahanids, one after another, these principalities were absorbed into the growing empire. For the first time, a substantial portion of Anatolia came under unified Ottoman control. From Bayezid's perspective, this represented a necessary step toward political stability. Not everyone agreed. Many local dynasties possessed deep regional roots and long-standing traditions of independent rule. Their incorporation into the Ottoman state often generated resentment among local elites, scholars, and military leaders whose authority diminished under centralized administration. These tensions would later carry profound consequences. Meanwhile, Bayezid intensified pressure upon Constantinople itself. The Byzantine Empire had shrunk dramatically. Outside its famous capital, little remained of the once mighty Eastern Roman Empire. Repeated Ottoman sieges tightened the city's isolation. Although Constantinople did not yet fall, its position grew increasingly desperate. Its survival depended largely upon external assistance that arrived only sporadically. Bayezid's growing power alarmed Western Europe. Reports describing Ottoman victories spread across royal courts. Papal authorities called for another crusade. Kings, dukes, and knights from France, Hungary, Germany, Burgundy, and other regions assembled what became one of the largest crusading armies of the late medieval period. Their objective was clear: stop Ottoman expansion before it reached the heart of Europe. The confrontation occurred in 1396 near the Danube fortress of Nicopolis in present-day Bulgaria. The crusading coalition possessed impressive numbers and included many of Europe's most celebrated noble warriors. Confidence within the crusader ranks ran high. Some chroniclers even recorded boasts that victory would come quickly. Bayezid, however, had prepared carefully. Rather than rushing recklessly into battle, Ottoman forces used disciplined formations, coordinated cavalry movements, and experienced infantry to absorb and counter repeated attacks. Many crusading knights launched aggressive charges without waiting for full coordination with allied forces. The resulting disorder created opportunities that Bayezid exploited with remarkable efficiency. By the end of the battle, the crusading army had collapsed. Thousands were killed. Many prominent nobles were captured. Among them was Jean de Nevers, later Duke of Burgundy, whose eventual ransom became famous throughout Europe. The Battle of Nicopolis fundamentally altered international perceptions. Across Europe, the Ottomans now appeared as one of the greatest military powers of the age. Within the Islamic world, Bayezid's prestige also reached new heights. His victories encouraged increasingly ambitious claims. He adopted more exalted titles. Some supporters even envisioned broader leadership across the Muslim world. Yet at the very moment Ottoman power seemed nearly unstoppable, events far beyond Anatolia began reshaping the political landscape. To the east, another conqueror was constructing an empire of astonishing scale. His name was Timur. Known in the west as Tamerlane, Timur had forged a vast dominion stretching across Central Asia, Persia, and beyond. Although he claimed continuity with a Mongol imperial tradition established by Genghis Khan, his own empire rested upon military brilliance, political calculation, and relentless campaigning. Timur regarded himself as the rightful arbiter of power across much of the Islamic world. Bayezid's rapid expansion inevitably attracted his attention. Relations deteriorated steadily. Several Anatolian rulers displaced by Bayezid fled eastward and appealed directly to Timur for assistance. They portrayed Bayezid as an aggressor who had unjustly seized their ancestral domains. Timur demanded that these territories be restored. Bayezid refused. Letters exchanged between the two rulers grew increasingly hostile. Each questioned the legitimacy of the other. Each believed compromise would demonstrate weakness. War became unavoidable. In 1402, the two armies met near Ankara. It was one of the most consequential battles in Ottoman history. Bayezid's army remained formidable. Its ranks included experienced Balkan troops, Anatolian cavalry, and elite infantry. Timur's forces, however, possessed enormous battlefield experience acquired through decades of campaigning across Asia. His cavalry excelled in mobile warfare. His logistical preparations were meticulous. Some contemporary accounts also mention war elephants accompanying parts of his army, though their battlefield role remains debated among historians. Perhaps even more damaging for Bayezid was political uncertainty within his own ranks. Several Anatolian contingents whose former rulers had appealed to Timur switched sides during the battle. As fighting intensified beneath the summer heat, Ottoman cohesion gradually deteriorated. Timur exploited every weakness. His cavalry surrounded isolated formations. Defections multiplied. Bayezid continued resisting with determination, but the strategic situation became hopeless. Eventually he was captured. For the first time since Osman founded the dynasty more than a century earlier, the Ottoman ruler had fallen into enemy hands. The consequences were devastating. Timur had not merely defeated an army. He had shattered the political structure holding the expanding Ottoman Empire together. Bayezid died in captivity the following year. The precise circumstances remain uncertain. Some later stories claimed humiliation or mistreatment. Modern historians generally regard many of these tales as exaggerated legends that developed afterward. Illness combined with the emotional strain of captivity likely contributed to his death. Regardless of the exact cause, his passing created a crisis unlike anything the Ottoman state had previously experienced. Without a universally accepted system of succession, Bayezid's surviving sons each claimed the throne. The empire that had seemed poised to dominate both Europe and Anatolia suddenly fractured into competing spheres of influence. The gains of previous generations appeared dangerously vulnerable. Many observers believed the Ottoman experiment had reached its end. Instead, it was about to face the greatest test of its resilience. The struggle that followed would determine whether the dynasty founded by Osman would disappear into history alongside countless forgotten frontier states, or emerge stronger than ever before. The defeat at Ankara in 1402 sent shockwaves through every corner of the Ottoman realm. For more than a century, the dynasty founded by Osman had expanded almost continuously. There had been setbacks, difficult campaigns, and determined resistance from neighboring states. But the general direction had always been forward. Now, for the first time, that momentum had come to an abrupt halt. The empire had lost its ruler. Its army had been shattered. Its authority had fractured. What followed was not a simple succession dispute. It became a struggle for survival. Bayezid's sons each believed they possessed a legitimate claim to the throne. Ottoman tradition offered no fixed rule determining which son should inherit power. Instead, succession was decided through political skill, military strength, and ultimately victory on the battlefield. The principle had allowed energetic rulers to emerge in earlier generations, but under these extraordinary circumstances, it threatened to destroy the state entirely. Four princes emerged as the principal contenders. Suleiman established himself in the European provinces. Musa initially played a more limited role, but would later become central to the conflict. Each prince gathered supporters. Each controlled portions of the former empire. Each issued orders as though he were already the rightful sultan. The result was more than a decade of civil war. Historians refer to this period as the Ottoman interregnum. Unlike many medieval succession conflicts, this struggle unfolded across two continents. Anatolia and the Balkans became separate theaters of political competition. Local governors shifted allegiances. Frontier commanders weighed their options carefully. Christian rulers in southeastern Europe observed events closely, recognizing that Ottoman weakness presented opportunities to recover lost independence. In Anatolia, the effects of the defeat at Ankara became immediately visible. Many Turkish beyliks that Bayezid had conquered reasserted their independence. Timur, before returning east, deliberately restored several former rulers to power. By doing so, he weakened the Ottoman position without needing to occupy Anatolia himself. The political map fragmented almost overnight. Cities that had recently answered to Ottoman governors now followed local dynasties once again. Tax revenues declined. Military recruitment became increasingly difficult. Trade routes grew less secure. For many contemporaries, it appeared entirely possible that the Ottoman state would simply dissolve into the same collection of rival principalities from which it had originally emerged. Yet despite the chaos, important institutions survived. Provincial administrators continued functioning. Local judges maintained legal order. Urban markets remained active. Perhaps most importantly, the idea of Ottoman legitimacy endured. Even while fighting one another, Bayezid's sons all claimed to represent the same dynasty rather than founding entirely new states. This distinction would eventually prove crucial. The first major contest unfolded between Mehmed and Isa. Mehmed approached the conflict cautiously. Rather than seeking immediate decisive battles, he focused on strengthening his position, securing alliances, and consolidating territory. His patience paid off. Near Ulubat, his forces defeated Isa. The defeated prince fled, but was later captured and killed. One rival had been eliminated. The struggle, however, was far from over. Meanwhile, Suleiman enjoyed significant advantages in Europe. The Balkan provinces remained comparatively stable. Their agricultural wealth and established administrative structures provided valuable resources. From his base at Edirne, Suleiman attempted to extend his influence back into Anatolia. For a time, he even occupied Bursa, the former Ottoman capital. Yet political strength depends upon more than military success. Suleiman's reliance upon cooperation with neighboring Christian powers created unease among many Anatolian supporters. His critics accused him of placing personal ambition above broader Ottoman interests. Whether these accusations were entirely fair remains open to debate. Nevertheless, perception often shapes politics as much as reality. Mehmed carefully cultivated his own image. He presented himself as the defender of Ottoman unity, a ruler committed to restoring order rather than merely claiming power. This message resonated with many local leaders exhausted by years of conflict. The next stage of the struggle revealed Mehmed's political skill. Rather than confronting Suleiman directly, he encouraged another brother to challenge him. Musa crossed into Europe with military support from Mehmed. Discontented factions within the Balkans rallied behind the new claimant. Gradually, Suleiman's coalition weakened. Key commanders defected. Support eroded. In 1411, Suleiman was captured and killed. Once again, one rival had disappeared. But success created an unexpected problem. Musa now controlled the European provinces. Instead of remaining Mehmed's ally, he asserted his own claim to the throne. His government soon became increasingly authoritarian. Former supporters found themselves marginalized or punished. Diplomatic relationships deteriorated. The alliance that had removed Suleiman collapsed almost immediately. The final phase of the civil war now centered upon two brothers, Mehmed in Anatolia, Musa in Europe. Both possessed experienced armies. Both commanded substantial territory. Both believed themselves destined to reunify the empire. The decisive confrontation came in 1413 near present-day Sofia. Mehmed assembled a broad coalition. Former supporters of Suleiman joined him. Serbian allies contributed troops. Regional leaders weary of endless conflict rallied to his banner. The battle ended with Musa's defeat. He attempted to escape, but was captured and killed. After 11 years of civil war, only one surviving son of Bayezid remained. Mehmed emerged victorious. History remembers him as Mehmed I. More importantly, later Ottoman chroniclers honored him as the restorer. His greatest achievement was not conquest. It was survival. He inherited an empire exhausted by internal warfare. The treasury required rebuilding. Provincial administration needed reconstruction. Diplomatic relationships demanded careful repair. Military forces had to be reorganized. Mehmed recognized that attempting rapid expansion would only create new instability. Instead, he pursued consolidation. Administrative offices reopened under experienced officials. Tax collection became more regular. Provincial governors answered once again to central authority. Relations with neighboring rulers were handled pragmatically. Where military action proved necessary, Mehmed acted decisively. Where diplomacy offered better results, he negotiated. In Anatolia, some former beyliks accepted Ottoman authority peacefully. Others required limited campaigns before rejoining the empire. The process unfolded gradually rather than dramatically. In Europe, several vassal states that had loosened ties during the Civil War accepted renewed Ottoman supremacy without prolonged conflict. Mehmed understood that reconciliation often achieved more than punishment. His reign demonstrated restraint unusual for an era dominated by conquest. Instead of seeking glory through spectacular campaigns, he concentrated upon rebuilding institutions capable of supporting future generations. Religious patronage also played an important role. Mosques were restored. Religious schools received support. Charitable endowments resumed operation. These efforts reinforced the image of the Sultan as both political ruler and guardian of Islamic order. When Mehmed died in 1421, the Ottoman state remained smaller than it had been under Bayezid before Ankara. Yet possessed something even more valuable: stability. His son Murad II inherited not a collapsing dynasty, but a functioning empire capable of renewed expansion. Murad's accession occurred far more smoothly than many earlier successions. This itself demonstrated how thoroughly Mehmed had restored central authority. Challenges, nevertheless, emerged almost immediately. Several Anatolian principalities tested the resolve of the young sultan. Murad responded with swift military campaigns that reaffirmed Ottoman authority across much of western and central Anatolia. These operations were not merely territorial. They signaled that the era of fragmentation had ended. The empire had returned. Attention soon shifted once again toward southeastern Europe. Hungary remained the principal Christian power opposing Ottoman expansion. Serbia, Wallachia, and Albania each presented distinct political challenges. Murad combined military force with diplomacy much as his father had done. Some rulers accepted vassal status. Others resisted. Campaigns continued almost every year. One institutional development gained increasing importance during Murad's reign. The devshirme system became more firmly established. Regular recruitment supplied the expanding Janissary Corps and the imperial administration with trained personnel loyal directly to the Sultan. While controversial both then and now, the system helped strengthen central government by reducing dependence upon hereditary aristocracies. It became one of the defining characteristics of Ottoman governance. Murad also invested heavily in architecture. Mosques, schools, bridges, markets, and charitable foundations appeared throughout major cities. These projects served practical purposes while also expressing imperial legitimacy. Stone monuments communicated permanence. They reminded subjects that Ottoman authority was intended to endure. Meanwhile, events in Europe continued reshaping the balance of power. In 1430, Ottoman forces captured Thessaloniki after years of Venetian control. The city represented one of the most significant commercial centers in the northern Aegean. Its incorporation strengthened Ottoman economic networks while expanding access to maritime trade. European rulers watched these developments with growing concern. Calls for another crusade intensified. Pope Eugenius IV encouraged cooperation among Christian kingdoms. Hungary assumed a leading role. Experienced commanders such as John Hunyadi emerged as determined opponents of Ottoman expansion. Murad initially sought peace. In 1444, he concluded a treaty with Hungary and, perhaps believing the empire temporarily secure, abdicated in favor of his young son Mehmed. The decision surprised many contemporaries. Whether motivated by exhaustion, personal reflection, or confidence in recent diplomatic agreements, it remains one of the more unusual episodes in Ottoman history. The timing quickly proved unfortunate. Encouraged by papal diplomacy, the crusading coalition broke the peace treaty and resumed military operations. Facing a major external invasion, leading Ottoman officials urged Murad to return. According to later tradition, they reminded the retired sultan that if he truly no longer ruled, then he should allow the reigning sultan to command. If, however, the young Mehmed lacked the necessary experience, then Murad still bore responsibility for defending the empire. Whatever the exact wording, the message succeeded. Murad resumed command. The two armies met near Varna on the Black Sea coast in November 1444. The crusading coalition fought under King the Ladislaw III of Poland and Hungary, supported by John Hunyadi and numerous European nobles. The battle became one of the decisive engagements of the 15th century. Initially, portions of the crusading army achieved success. Then events changed suddenly. King the Ladislaw launched an aggressive cavalry attack directly toward Murad's position. The assault failed. The king was killed. His death shattered morale throughout the coalition. Having previously served within the Ottoman system before returning to lead his homeland, Skanderbeg combined local knowledge with considerable military ability. For years, his campaigns tied down significant Ottoman resources, although the Ottomans ultimately retained broader regional dominance. Albanian resistance under Skanderbeg became one of the empire's most persistent military challenges. Murad's government nevertheless continued strengthening state institutions. Tax administration improved. Land grants supporting military service were regulated more carefully. Provincial governors operated under closer supervision. The empire became increasingly centralized. By the time Murad died in 1451, He had transformed the Ottoman state into one of the strongest powers in both Europe and Western Asia. He left the throne to his son, the same prince whose brief first reign had ended when his father returned to face the Crusaders. Now that prince would rule alone. He was only 19 years old. Many neighboring rulers underestimated him. Some assumed his youth would create opportunities. Others believed internal divisions might soon reappear. Few realized they were witnessing the beginning of one of history's most remarkable reigns. The young sultan was Mehmed II. His greatest ambition had already taken shape. For centuries, Muslim rulers had dreamed of capturing Constantinople. Arab armies had besieged it. Bulgarian rulers had threatened it. Russian princes had admired it. Crusaders had occupied it. Yet despite every challenge, the ancient capital of the Eastern Roman Empire still stood. Its massive walls had resisted generations of attackers. Its strategic position controlled the passage between Europe and Asia. Its churches, palaces, and fortifications symbolized more than 1,000 years of imperial history. To conquer Constantinople would mean more than winning another city. It would change the course of world history, and Mehmed intended to do exactly that. When Mehmed II became sultan for the second time in 1451, he inherited a state that was stronger than any previous Ottoman ruler had possessed. The decades of instability that had followed the defeat at Ankara were now firmly in the past. The administrative foundations restored by Mehmed I and strengthened by Murad II had produced a centralized government, an experienced army, and a treasury capable of supporting ambitious campaigns. Yet Mehmed believed that one objective remained unfinished. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood at the crossroads of continents. Founded as the eastern capital of the Roman Empire, it had survived invasions, sieges, civil wars, and political upheaval. Although the Byzantine Empire that once ruled vast territories had steadily declined, its capital still carried enormous symbolic importance. Whoever controlled Constantinople controlled one of the most strategic locations in the world. The city overlooked the Bosporus. Its harbors connected the Black Sea with the Mediterranean. Trade flowed through its markets. Pilgrims, merchants, diplomats, and soldiers passed through its gates. Even after centuries of decline, Constantinople remained one of the great cities of the medieval world. By the middle of the 15th century, however, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a handful of surrounding territories. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos ruled courageously, but his resources were limited. The population had fallen dramatically compared with earlier centuries. Financial difficulties affected nearly every aspect of government. The once vast imperial territories that had supplied taxes, soldiers, and agricultural production were gone. Even so, Constantinople possessed one advantage that had protected it for centuries: its walls. The massive Theodosian walls stretching across the western land approach ranked among the greatest defensive systems ever constructed. Built during the 5th century and strengthened over generations, they consisted of multiple defensive layers supported by towers and ditches. Numerous armies had attempted to breach them. None had succeeded. Mehmed understood that defeating such defenses would require careful preparation rather than simple determination. Almost immediately after taking the throne, he began planning on a scale rarely seen in medieval warfare. One of his first strategic decisions involved controlling the Bosporus completely. On the European shore of the strait, directly opposite an earlier Ottoman fortress, Construction began on a powerful new stronghold known today as Rummeli-Hizari. The location was carefully chosen. Any vessel attempting to sail toward Constantinople from the Black Sea would now pass between two Ottoman fortresses. Heavy artillery overlooked the narrow waterway. Ships refusing to stop could be fired upon. The Byzantine capital found itself increasingly isolated. Diplomatic preparations accompanied military planning. Mehmed sought to prevent neighboring powers from forming an effective coalition before the siege began. Temporary agreements reduced immediate threats along other frontiers. Potential rivals were watched carefully. Every effort focused upon ensuring that when the campaign opened, Ottoman forces could concentrate overwhelmingly on Constantinople itself. Perhaps the most famous aspect of Mehmed's preparations involved artillery. For centuries, siege warfare had relied upon catapults, battering rams, mining operations, and siege towers. Gunpowder weapons had gradually appeared across Europe and Asia, but artillery technology continued developing rapidly during the 15th century. Mehmed recognized its potential. A Hungarian engineer known as Urban, sometimes rendered as Orban in historical sources, entered Ottoman service after reportedly failing to secure sufficient support from the Byzantines. Under Mehmed's patronage, enormous bombards were cast. These weapons were extraordinary for their time. Some required teams of oxen merely to transport them. Others demanded hundreds of workers to position and maintain them. They fired massive stone projectiles capable of damaging even the strongest fortifications, though they could only be discharged infrequently because of the time required for cooling and reloading. Even with such artillery, success remained uncertain. The walls of Constantinople had resisted every previous assault. No one knew whether these new weapons would truly change the outcome. By early April 1453, preparations were complete. The Ottoman army advanced toward the city. Modern estimates of its size vary considerably, but historians generally agree that it substantially outnumbered the defenders. The force included experienced cavalry, provincial troops, artillery specialists, engineers, and the elite janissaries. A supporting fleet operated at sea. Inside Constantinople, the situation appeared far more difficult. The emperor commanded only a few thousand defenders. These included Byzantine soldiers alongside volunteers from Genoa, Venice, and other Italian communities. One of the most respected commanders was Giovanni Giustiniani, an experienced Genoese soldier whose leadership greatly strengthened the city's defenses. Despite their limited numbers, the defenders possessed determination. Many understood that they were witnessing the final struggle for the Byzantine Empire. The siege officially began on the 6th of April. Day after day, Ottoman artillery bombarded the walls. The tremendous cannons created breaches that defenders worked tirelessly to repair each night. Whenever sections collapsed, laborers hurried forward with stones, timber, and earth to restore defensive positions before the next assault. The rhythm became relentless. Bombardment. Repair. Bombardment again. Mehmed attempted repeated attacks. Each met determined resistance. The defenders understood every section of the fortifications. Archers, crossbowmen, and artillery crews responded wherever pressure increased. For weeks, the city continued resisting. At sea, another obstacle confronted the Ottomans. The entrance to the Golden Horn, the protected harbor along Constantinople's northern side, had been blocked by a massive iron chain stretched across its mouth. This prevented hostile fleets from entering. As long as the chain held, the defenders could concentrate much of their naval effort inside the harbor. Mehmed searched for another solution. What followed became one of the most famous engineering operations of the entire siege. Instead of attempting to force ships through the chain, Ottoman engineers prepared a route across land. Greased wooden timbers created a temporary roadway over the hills north of the harbor. Then, under cover of darkness, Ottoman vessels were hauled overland by men and animals. When morning arrived, defenders looking toward the Golden Horn saw Ottoman ships floating inside waters they had believed completely secure. The psychological effect was immense. Now the city faced danger from another direction. Artillery positions expanded. Defensive resources had to be divided. Pressure increased steadily. Even so, Constantinople refused to surrender. Within the city, supplies gradually diminished. Every casualty mattered. Western Europe expressed sympathy, and appeals for assistance circulated widely, but meaningful military relief never arrived in time. Political divisions, distance, competing priorities, and limited coordination all contributed to the absence of a major rescue force. The defenders increasingly realized that they stood alone. As May approached, Mehmed intensified preparations for a final assault. Additional artillery bombardments widened damaged sections of the walls. Engineers studied weak points carefully. Fresh troops assembled for coordinated attacks. Within Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI continued encouraging both soldiers and civilians. According to later accounts, a final religious service brought together worshippers who had previously been divided by long-standing theological disagreements. In the face of impending catastrophe, unity mattered more than old disputes. During the early hours of the 29th of May, 1453, the decisive assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops advanced against the defenses. The first attacks exhausted defenders. Subsequent assaults increased pressure. Eventually, the elite janissaries entered the fighting. At roughly the same time, Giovanni Giustiniani suffered a serious wound. His removal from the battlefield deeply affected morale among the defenders. Historians continued debating the precise sequence of events that followed. Some accounts emphasize breaches created by artillery. Others describe a smaller gate that may have been left unsecured during intense fighting. Whatever the exact details, Ottoman forces established a foothold inside the defenses. Once that occurred, organized resistance rapidly became impossible. The emperor refused to flee. According to long-standing tradition, Constantine XI removed the insignia, identifying him as emperor, and entered the fighting alongside ordinary soldiers. His body was never identified with certainty. His death marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, an empire that traced its origins directly back to the Roman Empire had finally disappeared after more than 1,000 years. As was common following the successful capture of a city during medieval warfare, looting occurred during the initial hours after the conquest. Before long, however, Mehmed intervened to restore order. He understood that his objective extended beyond military victory. He intended Constantinople to become the capital of his empire. Destroying it would serve no long-term purpose. Soon after entering the city, Mehmed visited Hagia Sophia. For nearly 1,000 years, this magnificent building had stood as the principal cathedral of Eastern Christianity. Following the conquest, it was converted into a mosque. The transformation carried enormous symbolic importance. It announced not only the transfer of political authority, but also the beginning of a new chapter in the city's history. Yet Mehmed did not seek to erase Constantinople itself. Instead, he sought to revive it. Years of warfare and economic decline had reduced the city's population considerably. Large districts stood partially abandoned. Commercial activity had diminished. The new sultan launched an ambitious rebuilding program. People from throughout the empire were encouraged, and in some cases required, to settle in the capital. Muslims arrived from Anatolia. Greek Orthodox Christians returned. Armenian communities expanded. Jewish families established neighborhoods. Merchants reopened markets. Craftsmen restored workshops. The city slowly regained its vitality. Administrative institutions were reorganized. Palaces required construction. Markets expanded. Roads and water systems received attention. Constantinople once again became one of the great urban centers of the Eastern Mediterranean. In time, everyday speech increasingly favored the name Istanbul, although official usage of Constantinople continued alongside it for many years. Mehmed's ambitions extended beyond rebuilding. He viewed himself as the heir to multiple imperial traditions. Within the Islamic world, he ruled as a powerful Muslim sovereign. At the same time, he adopted the title Kaiser I Rome, meaning Caesar of Rome. This claim reflected his belief that possession of Constantinople made him the legitimate successor to the Roman imperial legacy centered there for centuries. Whether neighboring rulers accepted that claim was another matter. But the symbolism mattered enormously within Ottoman political thought. The conquest of Constantinople transformed international politics. Across Europe, the event generated profound concern. Many rulers feared further Ottoman expansion into the Balkans and beyond. Within the Islamic world, the conquest received widespread celebration. For centuries, traditions had praised the future ruler who would one day capture the great city. Now that prophecy was widely believed to have been fulfilled. For Mehmed personally, however, Constantinople represented not the conclusion of his ambitions, but their beginning. With a secure imperial capital linking Europe and Asia, strengthened administrative institutions, and growing military resources, he turned his attention toward building an empire that would extend far beyond the walls he had just conquered. The Ottoman state had entered a new era. Its future would no longer be measured as that of a frontier kingdom. It would now compete among the greatest empires of its age. The capture of Constantinople in 1453 marked one of history's defining moments. But for Sultan Mehmed II, it was not the end of the campaign. It was the beginning of an entirely new vision. He had achieved the goal that generations of Muslim rulers had pursued without success, yet he understood that holding the city would require far more than celebrating its conquest. If Constantinople was to become the heart of a lasting empire, it needed people, institutions, commerce, and a government capable of administering territories that stretched across continents. The city Mehmed inherited had suffered through years of decline. Centuries of warfare, political instability, and economic contraction had reduced both its population and its prosperity. Entire districts contained abandoned buildings. Commercial activity had diminished. Many workshops stood empty, although its walls remained among the strongest ever built. The city behind them no longer reflected the grandeur of earlier centuries. Mehmed intended to change that. Almost immediately after the conquest, he launched an ambitious program of reconstruction. Skilled craftsmen were encouraged to settle in the capital. Merchants received incentives to reopen trade. Families from many parts of the empire relocated to the city, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes through organized resettlement directed by the government. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all became part of this rebuilding process. The Ottoman capital quickly began to recover. Markets reopened. Neighborhoods expanded. Religious communities rebuilt their institutions. Commercial routes that had once passed through Constantinople gradually returned. The city once again became one of the most important centers connecting Europe, Asia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. This revival reflected one of Mehmed's greatest strengths as a ruler. He understood that military conquest alone could never sustain an empire. Cities generated wealth. Trade produced tax revenue. Administration required educated officials. Stability encouraged investment. Victory on the battlefield mattered, but prosperity afterward mattered just as much. To govern this growing empire more effectively, Mehmed strengthened the central administration. The Imperial Council, known as the Divan, became increasingly important. Senior officials advised the Sultan on military affairs, finance, justice, diplomacy, and provincial administration. Although the Sultan remained the ultimate authority, governance increasingly depended upon capable bureaucrats whose expertise allowed the empire to function across vast distances. Many of these officials had entered government through the Devshirme system. Having received extensive education in the palace schools, they possessed administrative training as well as personal loyalty to the dynasty. Their advancement depended not upon inherited noble status, but upon ability and service. This meritocratic element distinguished the Ottoman administration from many contemporary states. While aristocratic families certainly retained influence, the empire increasingly promoted talented individuals regardless of their family origins. Mehmed also devoted considerable attention to law. Islamic law continued serving as the foundation of the legal system, but governing a rapidly expanding empire required regulations covering taxation, land ownership, criminal justice, administration, and countless practical matters that extended beyond traditional religious jurisprudence. To address these needs, Mehmed issued collections of imperial laws known as canons. These legal codes operated alongside Islamic law rather than replacing it. Together, they created a system that combined religious principles with practical state administration. Uniform legal standards strengthened central authority. Provincial governors understood their responsibilities more clearly. Tax collection became more consistent. Property rights gained greater definition, although later rulers would continue revising these laws. Mehmed established a framework that shaped Ottoman governance for centuries. His attention soon returned to military expansion. The Byzantine Empire had disappeared, but neighboring powers still controlled important territories surrounding the new Ottoman capital. To the north, Serbian fortresses remained significant obstacles. To the west, Venetian possessions controlled strategic islands and coastal cities. In Albania, resistance under Skanderbeg continued. Across Anatolia, several Turkish principalities still challenged complete Ottoman authority. Mehmed intended to resolve each of these questions. Campaigns across Serbia steadily expanded Ottoman influence. Fortresses fell one after another. Belgrade, however, proved a different matter. In 1456, Mehmed attempted to capture this strategically vital city. Hungarian commander John Hunyadi organized a determined defense. Despite intense fighting, the Ottomans failed to take the fortress. It represented one of the few major setbacks during Mehmed's reign. Yet defeat at Belgrade did not alter the broader direction of Ottoman expansion. Elsewhere, victories continued accumulating. Attention soon shifted towards southern Greece. The Duchy of Athens, one of several remaining Latin states established after the Fourth Crusade, gradually came under Ottoman control. The Peloponnese followed through a series of campaigns conducted over subsequent years. These operations completed the incorporation of many territories that had once belonged to various Byzantine successor states. Another important objective lay along the Black Sea coast. Far to the northeast, the Empire of Trebizond still survived. Founded after the fragmentation of Byzantine authority during the Fourth Crusade, Trebizond had preserved its independence for more than 2 centuries. Its rulers maintained diplomatic contacts with neighboring Christian kingdoms and occasionally sought alliances against Ottoman expansion. Mehmed viewed its continued existence as unacceptable. In 1461, Ottoman forces advanced toward the city. After careful planning and coordinated operations, Trebizond surrendered. Its incorporation marked the final disappearance of the last significant independent Byzantine successor state. With its fall, every major remnant of the old Eastern Roman political order had now passed into Ottoman hands. Meanwhile, Anatolia demanded continued attention. The Karamanids remained the most powerful Turkish rivals, still resisting Ottoman authority. For generations, they had competed with the Ottomans for influence across central Anatolia. Their territory occupied strategically valuable routes connecting eastern and western regions. Repeated campaigns gradually reduced their independence. Eventually, their lands were absorbed into the expanding empire. This achievement held both practical and symbolic importance. Practically, it unified much of Anatolia under a single government. Symbolically, it strengthened Ottoman claims to leadership among the Turkish states that had emerged after the decline of Seljuk authority. Mehmed's ambitions extended beyond land campaigns. He also recognized the growing importance of naval power. The Eastern Mediterranean contained numerous islands, ports, and commercial routes whose control influenced regional politics as much as victories on land. Ottoman fleets expanded steadily. Operations along the Black Sea secured additional harbors. Relations with the Crimean Khanate deepened. Eventually, Crimea entered into a vassal relationship with the Ottoman Empire, providing strategic advantages that would shape Black Sea politics for centuries. Control of these maritime networks strengthened commerce, while limiting opportunities for rival powers. Although Venice remained a formidable naval competitor, Ottoman influence steadily increased across the Eastern Mediterranean. Military success alone does not fully explain Mehmed's reign. He also displayed remarkable intellectual curiosity. Unlike many medieval rulers remembered solely for warfare, Mehmed actively encouraged scholarship, literature, philosophy, and the arts. His court attracted historians, mathematicians, theologians, physicians, architects, and artists from diverse backgrounds. Greek scholars found employment alongside Muslim intellectuals. Persian literary traditions flourished beside Turkish poetry. Arabic scholarship continued receiving royal patronage. Translations of classical texts expanded knowledge available within the empire. This cosmopolitan atmosphere reflected Mehmed's broader conception of imperial rule. He viewed his capital as a meeting point between civilizations rather than the exclusive domain of a single culture. Architecture similarly became an expression of imperial identity. Construction projects transformed the city's appearance. Mosques, schools, markets, baths, caravanserais, and charitable foundations appeared throughout Istanbul. Among the most important developments was the construction of Topkapi Palace. Rather than functioning simply as a royal residence, the complex became the administrative heart of the empire. Within its walls, imperial councils met. Foreign ambassadors presented credentials. Treasury officials managed finances. Military decisions shaped campaigns extending across 3 continents. Archives preserved state records. Education prepared future administrators. Topkapi evolved into the operational center of Ottoman government for centuries. Yet Mehmed ruled firmly. He believed that centralized authority remained essential for imperial stability. Provincial rebellions received decisive responses. Officials suspected of corruption or disloyalty faced severe punishment. Military commanders understood that failure could carry serious consequences. This combination of cultural openness and political discipline became one of the defining characteristics of his government. By the final years of his reign, the transformation was unmistakable. The small frontier principality founded by Osman less than 2 centuries earlier had become one of the most powerful states in the world. Its territories stretched across southeastern Europe and Anatolia. Its capital ranked among the great cities of the age. Its bureaucracy administered millions of subjects. Its armies commanded respect from neighboring kingdoms. Its rulers increasingly viewed themselves not merely as successful conquerors, but as emperors governing a universal state. When Mehmed died in 1481, he left behind an empire fundamentally different from the one he had inherited. Future generations would remember him by the title that best captured his greatest achievement: Fatih, the Conqueror. Yet succession within the Ottoman dynasty rarely proceeded without tension. Although Mehmed had strengthened institutions considerably, no fixed rule determined which prince should inherit the throne. Several sons remained alive. Each possessed supporters. Each governed provinces. Each believed himself capable of ruling. Within days of Mehmed's death, uncertainty spread through the empire. The contest centered upon 2 principal rivals. Bayezid, governor of Amasya, enjoyed support among many experienced officials and members of the Janissary Corps. His younger brother, Sem, governed Karaman and attracted his own loyal followers. Both hurried toward the capital. Speed became critical. Whoever reached Istanbul first would possess a decisive political advantage. Bayezid arrived before his brother. He was proclaimed sultan. The transition appeared complete. Saying Jizagrid, rather than accepting defeat, he declared himself ruler in Bursa and raised an army. Civil war once again threatened the dynasty. The conflict proved relatively brief. Bayezid defeated Sem in battle, forcing him to seek refuge outside Ottoman territory. His search for protection led first to the Knights Hospitaller on Rhodes. Later he entered the custody of the papacy in Rome. For years afterward, European rulers recognized Sem's value as a political bargaining tool. As long as he remained alive, rival powers could potentially threaten Bayezid by presenting his brother as an alternative claimant. Bayezid, therefore, devoted considerable diplomatic effort and financial resources to ensuring that Sem remained securely under foreign supervision rather than returning to challenge the throne. The episode highlighted an enduring feature of Ottoman politics. Even at the height of imperial power, dynastic succession remained one of the state's greatest vulnerabilities. Despite this early crisis, Bayezid soon established stable control. His reign would differ noticeably from that of his father. Where Mehmed had pursued almost continuous expansion, Bayezid generally preferred consolidation. He strengthened infrastructure. He supported religious institutions. He invested in education. Mosques, bridges, charitable complexes, and schools appeared throughout the empire. His government emphasized administrative continuity rather than spectacular conquest. One event during Bayezid's reign would resonate far beyond Ottoman borders. In 1492, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon completed the conquest of Granada, ending centuries of Muslim rule in Iberia. Soon afterward, large numbers of Jews were expelled from Spain. Many sought refuge elsewhere. Bayezid welcomed substantial numbers of these Sephardic Jewish communities into the Ottoman Empire. They settled in cities including Istanbul, Salonika, and other commercial centers, where they contributed significantly to trade, finance, medicine, scholarship, and craftsmanship. Their arrival reflected the empire's pragmatic approach toward population, commerce, and economic development. Yet while Bayezid focused upon stability, new dangers were emerging beyond the eastern frontier. A powerful dynasty was rising in Persia. Its religious identity differed sharply from that of the Ottoman state. Its ambitions would eventually reshape the politics of the entire Middle East. The confrontation between these two empires would become one of the defining rivalries of the early modern world. By the closing years of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire appeared stable from the outside. Its administration functioned efficiently. Its economy remained active, and its capital had become one of the greatest cities in the world. Yet beneath that appearance of stability, new challenges were beginning to reshape the political landscape of the Middle East. Unlike many of the threats the Ottomans had faced during earlier generations, this one was not simply territorial. It combined military ambition, political rivalry, and profound religious differences. To the east, in Persia, a new dynasty had risen with extraordinary speed. Its founder was Shah Ismail, still a young man when he established his rule. Ismail united numerous Turkic tribes under the Safavid banner and transformed what had once been a religious movement into a powerful state. Even more significantly, he declared Twelver Shura Islam the official faith of his empire. This decision permanently altered the religious map of the region and created a direct ideological rival to the Sunni Ottoman state. For Sultan Bayezid II, the situation presented a difficult dilemma. The Safavids were not simply another neighboring kingdom seeking territory. Their influence extended across borders through religious networks, tribal loyalties, and political alliances. Among certain Turkic communities in eastern Anatolia, Shah Ismail attracted considerable admiration. Many tribes known collectively as the Kizilbash regarded him as both a political leader and a spiritual figure. Ottoman officials viewed this development with increasing concern. The eastern frontier no longer represented only a military border. It had become an ideological frontier as well. Bayezid preferred caution. Rather than launching an immediate invasion, he strengthened frontier defenses, monitored tribal activity, and attempted to contain Safavid influence without provoking a full-scale war. His approach reflected the broader character of his reign. Stability remained his highest priority. Not everyone within the empire agreed. Among Bayezid's sons was a prince who had spent years governing the province of Trabzon along the Black Sea coast. From this frontier position, he had observed Safavid expansion at close range. Unlike his father, he believed hesitation would only strengthen the Ottoman enemy. His name was Selim. History would remember him as Suleiman I. Later generations would also know him by another title, Yavuz, the Grim. The title reflected his stern personality, uncompromising discipline, and relentless determination. As Bayezid grew older, another succession struggle emerged. Several princes sought support among influential officials, provincial governors, and military leaders. The Janissaries, whose political influence had steadily increased over previous generations, played an important role in determining the outcome. Selim possessed strong backing within the army. Many experienced commanders admired his military reputation and shared his belief that decisive action against the Safavids could no longer be delayed. After a period of political maneuvering and open conflict, Selim prevailed. Bayezid abdicated in 1512. Soon afterward, he died while traveling away from the capital. The circumstances surrounding his death remain uncertain, though historians generally attribute it to illness rather than violence. Selim now ruled the Ottoman Empire. He wasted no time. The Ottoman army marched toward eastern Anatolia. Its destination lay beyond the frontier. The confrontation everyone had anticipated was finally approaching. The two armies met on the plain of Calderon. Few battles in Middle Eastern history would prove more significant. Shah Ismail's forces possessed tremendous mobility and exceptional cavalry. Their warriors had earned a formidable reputation through years of successful campaigning. Confidence within the Safavid ranks remained high. Selim's army, however, brought something increasingly decisive to the battlefield: gunpowder. The Ottomans had invested heavily in artillery and disciplined infantry equipped with firearms. The Janissaries fought from carefully prepared defensive positions supported by cannons whose firepower fundamentally altered the balance of battle. Repeated Safavid cavalry charges met devastating resistance. Traditional mounted attacks that had achieved success against many earlier enemies now encountered organized volleys of gunfire and concentrated artillery. Despite extraordinary bravery, Shah Ismail's forces could not overcome this technological and tactical advantage. The battle ended in decisive Ottoman victory. Shah Ismail escaped, but only narrowly. His aura of invincibility suffered a serious blow. For years, many followers had viewed him as almost destined for victory. Calderon shattered that perception. The Ottomans occupied Tabriz, the Safavid capital, although logistical difficulties prevented them from remaining permanently. Even so, the campaign fundamentally changed the regional balance of power. Eastern Anatolia now lay securely within Ottoman influence. The frontier between the two empires gradually evolved into one of the longest-lasting political boundaries in the Middle East. Although later wars would continue, neither side would completely eliminate the other. Instead, the Ottoman and Safavid empires would coexist as rival centers of Sunni and Shia political authority for generations. Most rulers might have considered such a victory sufficient for one reign. Selim did not. Almost immediately after securing the eastern frontier, his attention shifted southward. There, another great Islamic state controlled territories of enormous strategic importance: the Mamluk Sultanate. Based in Cairo, the Mamluks ruled Egypt, Syria, Palestine, and the Hijaz, including the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Their state possessed immense wealth derived from trade routes linking the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. Relations between the Ottomans and the Mamluks had long remained complicated. Both were Sunni Muslim powers. Both claimed important roles within the Islamic world. Commercial competition, diplomatic disagreements, and differing regional interests had produced years of tension. The Safavid conflict intensified these disagreements. Selim believed the Mamluks had failed to support the Ottoman struggle against Shah Ismail. He also recognized the extraordinary significance of controlling the Arab heartlands. War became increasingly likely. In 1516, Ottoman forces advanced into Syria. The decisive encounter occurred near Aleppo at the Battle of Marj-Dabik. Once again, Ottoman military organization demonstrated its strength. Artillery, disciplined infantry, coordinated cavalry. The Mamluks fought with determination, but their military system relied heavily upon elite mounted warriors whose traditional methods struggled against concentrated gunpowder weapons. The battle ended with Ottoman victory. The Mamluk Sultan was killed. Syria rapidly came under Ottoman control. Rather than stopping there, Selim continued south. The following year, Ottoman armies crossed into Egypt. Near Cairo, another major battle took place. The remaining Mamluk forces resisted fiercely, but the outcome mirrored earlier engagements. Ottoman victory became complete. Cairo surrendered. With remarkable speed, one of the oldest and wealthiest Islamic states disappeared as an independent power. Its territories became Ottoman provinces. The consequences reached far beyond military expansion. By incorporating Egypt, the Ottomans gained control of some of the richest agricultural lands in the eastern Mediterranean. They secured major Red Sea ports. They acquired access to trade routes connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean. Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, Mecca, Medina, all now formed part of the Ottoman realm. The empire's geographical center shifted dramatically. No longer was it simply a power based in Anatolia and the Balkans. It had become the dominant state of the Eastern Islamic world. One tradition associated with this conquest has attracted considerable historical attention. According to later Ottoman accounts, the last Abbasid caliph residing in Cairo formally transferred the title of caliph to Selim. Modern historians continue debating the exact details and timing of this event. What remains beyond dispute is that after the conquest of Egypt, Ottoman sultans increasingly assumed leadership roles that combined political authority with religious prestige across much of the Sunni Muslim world. Custodianship of the holy cities enhanced their legitimacy enormously. Pilgrimage routes came under Ottoman protection. Religious institutions received imperial support. The empire now carried responsibilities extending far beyond military conquest. Administering these newly acquired territories required careful organization. Egypt retained much of its existing administrative structure. Experienced local officials continued serving under Ottoman supervision. Rather than replacing every institution immediately, Selim adopted a pragmatic approach that balanced continuity with imperial authority. This flexibility became one of the enduring strengths of Ottoman government. Conquered regions often preserved important local customs while remaining firmly integrated into the wider imperial system. By the time Selim returned to Istanbul, the empire had changed almost beyond recognition. Its territory had nearly doubled. Its population had increased dramatically. Its economic resources had expanded. Its religious influence had reached unprecedented levels. Yet Selim ruled for only 8 years. His reign burned with extraordinary intensity. Campaign followed campaign. Victory followed victory. Then, in 1520, while preparing yet another military expedition, Selim died, probably from illness. He was only about 50 years old. Despite the brevity of his reign, few Ottoman rulers altered the empire so profoundly in such a short period. He had defeated the Safavids, destroyed the Mamluk Sultanate, added Syria, Egypt, Palestine, and the Hejaz to the empire, established Ottoman authority over Islam's holiest cities, and transformed a regional empire into the dominant power of the Middle East. His son would inherit a state unlike anything previous Ottoman rulers had governed. The frontiers now stretched from the Danube to the Nile, from the Persian frontier to North Africa. The treasury overflowed with new revenues. The army stood at the height of its confidence. The administration governed lands of astonishing diversity. The stage was prepared for what many historians regard as the greatest reign in Ottoman history. The new sultan was Suleiman. The world would remember him by two different names. In the Islamic world, he became known as King Uni, the lawgiver. Across Europe, he earned another title, Suleiman the Magnificent. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire would reach the height of its power, influence, and prestige. When Suleiman inherited the throne in 1520, he was 26 years old. He had spent years preparing for rule as a provincial governor, learning the practical realities of administration, military leadership, diplomacy, and finance. Unlike rulers who came to power unexpectedly, Suleiman had been educated from childhood with the expectation that one day he would govern one of the largest states on earth. The empire he inherited was already formidable. His father, Suleiman I, had doubled its territory. Its armies had recently defeated two of the strongest powers in the Islamic world. Its treasury had been enriched by new provinces. Its prestige had reached unprecedented heights. Yet Suleiman did not inherit a finished empire. He inherited an opportunity. Over the next 46 years, he would transform that opportunity into what many historians regard as the classical age of Ottoman civilization. His reign combined military success, legal reform, administrative stability, economic prosperity, artistic achievement, and architectural brilliance on a scale rarely matched by any ruler of the early modern world. The first years of his reign demonstrated immediately that he intended to continue expanding Ottoman influence. His attention turned toward the Kingdom of Hungary. For decades, Hungary had acted as the principal barrier separating the Ottoman Empire from Central Europe. Powerful fortresses lined the Danube, guarding the routes leading toward the Habsburg lands. Among those fortifications, none held greater strategic importance than Belgrade. Mehmed II had failed to capture it decades earlier. Its walls had resisted repeated attacks. Whoever controlled Belgrade controlled one of the main gateways into Central Europe. In 1521, Suleiman launched a carefully organized campaign. Unlike previous attempts, the Ottoman army arrived with overwhelming resources. Heavy artillery bombarded the defenses. Engineers advanced methodically. Supply lines remained secure. After determined resistance, Belgrade surrendered. The victory carried significance beyond the city itself. It demonstrated that the Ottomans had solved one of the major strategic obstacles that had frustrated earlier rulers. The road toward the Hungarian plain now stood open. While Europe absorbed the consequences of Belgrade's fall, Suleiman shifted his attention southward. The island of Rhodes remained under the control of the Knights Hospitaller. For centuries, the Knights had operated as one of the strongest Christian military orders in the eastern Mediterranean. Their ships regularly challenged Muslim commerce and naval movement. As long as Rhodes remained independent, Ottoman control of eastern Mediterranean sea routes would remain incomplete. In 1522, Suleiman assembled a massive expedition. The siege lasted for months. The defenders fought with remarkable determination. Their fortifications ranked among the strongest in Europe. Repeated assaults were repelled. Artillery duels continued day after day. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Eventually, however, the defenders recognized that further resistance had become impossible. Negotiations followed. Rather than ordering wholesale destruction, Suleiman allowed the surviving knights to leave the island with their weapons and personal possessions. The decision reflected a pattern that appeared repeatedly throughout his reign. Military strength could be accompanied by political pragmatism. The Knights Hospitaller later established themselves on Malta, where they would once again confront Ottoman expansion decades later. For the moment, however, Rhodes had become an Ottoman possession. Control of the eastern Mediterranean strengthened considerably. In 1526, the two powers met in one of the most decisive battles of 16th century Europe. The Battle of Mohacs lasted only a few hours. Its consequences lasted for centuries. The Hungarian army assembled quickly, hoping to confront the Ottomans before they could consolidate their position. Suleiman's forces, however, possessed overwhelming advantages in organization, artillery, and battlefield coordination. Ottoman canon disrupted ennemi formation. Disciplined infantry absorbed attacks. Cavalry exploited openings with devastating effect. By the end of the battle, the Hungarian army had been destroyed. King Louis II died while attempting to escape the battlefield. Without a clear successor, Hungary entered a prolonged political crisis. For the Ottoman Empire, Mohacs represented far more than another battlefield victory. It fundamentally changed the balance of power in Central Europe. The medieval kingdom of Hungary ceased to function as the dominant regional power it had once been. Its territory became contested between the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg dynasty. That rivalry would shape European politics for generations. Suleiman entered Buda, the Hungarian capital. Some regions became directly incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. Others remained under local rulers who acknowledged Ottoman authority. Still others came under Habsburg control. The result was a divided Hungary that became one of Europe's principal frontiers. Conflict between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs intensified. The Habsburg ruler Ferdinand claimed the Hungarian crown. Suleiman rejected that claim. Diplomatic disagreement gradually gave way to military confrontation. 3 years after Mohacs, Ottoman armies marched toward one of Europe's greatest cities, Vienna. The Habsburg capital stood at the center of Central European politics. Its capture would dramatically alter the balance of power. If Vienna fell, further Ottoman expansion into the German-speaking lands might become possible. In 1529, Suleiman reached the city. The campaign itself had already proven difficult. Heavy rains slowed movement. Roads deteriorated. Transporting large artillery pieces became increasingly challenging. Supply lines stretched over enormous distances. Nevertheless, the Ottoman army established siege positions. The defenders prepared carefully. Vienna possessed strong fortifications and determined leadership. Repeated Ottoman assaults met fierce resistance. Weather conditions continued worsening. Logistical problems accumulated. After weeks of fighting, Suleiman ordered withdrawal. The city had survived. Although the siege failed, its psychological impact proved enormous. Never before had an Ottoman army advanced so deeply into Central Europe. Across Europe, rulers realized that the Ottoman Empire represented not merely a regional power, but one capable of threatening the heart of the continent. For the Ottomans, the campaign demonstrated both their extraordinary reach and the practical limits imposed by distance, supply, and climate. While European campaigns attracted enormous attention, Suleiman never neglected the empire's eastern frontier. The Safavid Empire remained the principal rival in Asia. Under Shah Tahmasp, the Safavids adopted strategies designed to avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. Instead of risking decisive battles similar to Calderon, they often withdrew while denying supplies to advancing Ottoman armies. This strategy complicated Ottoman operations. Even so, Suleiman conducted several eastern campaigns. In 1534, Ottoman forces entered Baghdad. The city's importance extended far beyond military strategy. Baghdad had once served as the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate and remained one of the most significant centers of Islamic scholarship and culture. Its incorporation strengthened Ottoman prestige throughout the Muslim world. Control over Mesopotamia also secured valuable trade routes linking Anatolia, Persia, and the Persian Gulf. Although warfare with the Safavids continued intermittently for decades, neither empire achieved complete domination. Instead, both gradually accepted a frontier that remained relatively stable for generations. At sea, another remarkable transformation unfolded. Earlier Ottoman rulers had concentrated primarily on land warfare. During Suleiman's reign, naval power became equally important. The central figure in this development was Hayreddin Barbarossa. Originally active as a corsair in the Mediterranean, Barbarossa entered Ottoman service and eventually became Grand Admiral of the imperial fleet. Under his leadership, Ottoman naval strength expanded dramatically. Shipyards in Istanbul produced growing numbers of warships. Experienced sailors entered imperial service. Ports throughout North Africa strengthened connections with the Ottoman state. The defining naval confrontation occurred in 1538. Near the coast of western Greece, Ottoman and allied European fleets met at the Battle of Preveza. Barbarossa's tactical skill proved decisive. Despite facing a larger coalition, the Ottoman fleet secured victory. For decades afterward, Ottoman naval dominance shaped the eastern and central Mediterranean. Merchant shipping benefited from greater security. Military expeditions became easier to support. Diplomatic influence expanded across coastal regions, stretching from North Africa to the Levant. Ottoman naval activity even extended into the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Portuguese expansion threatened long-established trade routes linking the Middle East with South Asia. Ottoman fleets sought to protect commercial interests, pilgrimage routes, and strategic ports from growing European competition. Although they never displaced Portuguese influence completely, these campaigns demonstrated the truly global dimensions of Ottoman policy during Suleiman's reign. Military victories alone, however, cannot explain why Suleiman occupies such a unique place in Ottoman history. Within the empire itself, many contemporaries admired him less as a conqueror than as a lawgiver. His title, Kanuni, reflected this reputation. Earlier sultans had issued legal regulations addressing practical administrative needs. Suleiman expanded and systematized those efforts. His legal reforms sought consistency. Provincial officials received clearer instructions. Tax obligations became more precisely defined. Land administration improved. Commercial regulations supported economic activity across an empire containing hundreds of cities and millions of inhabitants. Islamic law remained central to Ottoman justice. At the same time, imperial legislation addressed areas requiring administrative flexibility. The combination produced one of the most sophisticated legal systems of the early modern world. For ordinary subjects, these reforms often meant greater predictability. Merchants benefited from clearer commercial rules. Farmers understood taxation more consistently. Provincial administrators operated within increasingly standardized procedures. The prosperity of the empire reflected these developments. Trade flourished across 3 continents. Caravanserais crossed Anatolia. Ships carried goods through the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Markets in Istanbul displayed products arriving from Europe, Africa, Arabia, Persia, Central Asia, and beyond. Spices, silks, precious metals, textiles, ceramics, timber, grain, coffee. The Ottoman capital became one of the world's great commercial crossroads. The cultural achievements of Suleiman's reign proved equally remarkable. Poetry flourished. Calligraphy reached extraordinary levels of refinement. Miniature painting developed distinctive artistic traditions. Music evolved within both courtly and religious settings. Perhaps no figure symbolizes this cultural flowering more completely than the architect Mehmed II. Originally trained through the Devshirme system and serving as a military engineer, Sinan eventually became chief imperial architect. During his career, he designed hundreds of structures, mosques, schools, hospitals, bridges, aqueducts, caravanserais, public baths. Each reflected technical mastery combined with aesthetic elegance. Among his greatest creations stood the Suleiman I Mosque in Istanbul. Completed during Suleiman's reign, it dominated the city's skyline. Its vast dome, its elegant minarets, its harmonious proportions, its surrounding educational and charitable institutions. Together, they expressed the confidence of an empire at its height. By the middle of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had become one of the most powerful states in the world. Its territory stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Persian frontier, from the Crimean steppe to the deserts of Arabia. Its armies commanded respect. Its fleets dominated major sea routes. Its administration governed immense diversity. Its capital rivaled any city on earth. Yet even during this extraordinary period, new challenges quietly emerged. Succession within the dynasty grew increasingly complicated. Court politics became more influential. Powerful advisors competed for influence. Members of the imperial family found themselves drawn into rivalries whose consequences would eventually shape the empire's future. For the moment, however, those tensions remained largely hidden behind the brilliance of what later generations would remember as the Ottoman Empire's golden age. The greatest years of Suleiman's reign were still unfolding. But so too were the first signs that even the strongest empires could not escape the pressures of time. As Suleiman grew older, the empire he had brought to extraordinary heights faced challenges that no battlefield victory could fully resolve. The Ottoman state remained immensely powerful, but its greatest questions increasingly came from within rather than from beyond its borders. The issue of succession became more urgent. Rivalries developed among the princes, influential court figures, and senior officials. Decisions made inside the palace would shape the future of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. One of the most painful episodes of Suleiman's later reign was the execution of his son Mustafa. Mustafa was widely respected within the army and was viewed by many contemporaries as a capable heir. Fearing that a struggle for the throne could threaten the stability of the state, Suleiman ordered his execution after accusations of disloyalty. Historians continue to debate the extent to which palace politics, misinformation, and the influence of competing factions contributed to that decision. Whatever the precise circumstances, the event left a lasting mark on Ottoman political memory. When Suleiman died in 1566 during a campaign in Hungary, his death was initially concealed from the army until an orderly succession could be arranged. It reflected how essential stability had become to the empire. By the end of his reign, the Ottoman Empire stood at its greatest territorial extent and enjoyed enormous prestige. Yet preserving such a vast state would prove increasingly difficult. His son Selim, too, inherited an empire that remained strong, but the pattern of government gradually began to change. Increasingly, experienced grand viziers assumed responsibility for day-to-day administration, while the personal involvement of the sultan varied from reign to reign. This did not mean the empire immediately entered decline. In fact, many of its institutions continued functioning effectively for decades. During Selim's reign, the Ottomans conquered Cyprus in 1571, securing another important position in the eastern Mediterranean. Yet that same year, the Ottoman fleet suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Lepanto against the Holy League. Although the navy was rebuilt surprisingly quickly and Ottoman maritime power recovered in practical terms, Lepanto carried enormous symbolic significance across Europe. It demonstrated that the Ottoman military could be defeated in a major naval engagement. In the decades that followed, the empire continued expanding in some regions while encountering growing pressures in others. Economic conditions changed as increasing quantities of silver from the Americas flowed into European markets, contributing to inflation that affected the Ottoman monetary system. Military expenditures rose. Provincial administration became more complicated. Local revolts appeared with greater frequency, particularly in Anatolia, where the Salali rebellions reflected a combination of economic hardship, political instability, and dissatisfaction with provincial governance. The Janissaries, once an elite military corps defined by strict discipline, gradually became a powerful political force. They defended their privileges and increasingly influenced events in the capital. At times they supported particular rulers. At other moments they opposed reforms or even participated directly in political upheaval. Their growing political role became one of the defining features of 17th century Ottoman history. The empire, nevertheless, demonstrated remarkable resilience. Strong grand viziers, particularly members of the Koprala family during the 17th century, restored order, improved finances, strengthened administration, and renewed military effectiveness. Under their leadership, the Ottomans achieved important victories, including the final conquest of Crete after one of the longest sieges in history. Yet Europe itself was changing rapidly. Military organization improved. Firearms became increasingly sophisticated. States developed more centralized taxation and administration. Standing armies expanded. Scientific knowledge advanced. Diplomacy became more complex. The balance of power gradually shifted. The defining turning point came in 1683 during the Second Siege of Vienna. Ottoman forces once again reached the Habsburg capital, hoping to secure a decisive victory in Central Europe. Instead, a relief army led by King John III Sobieski of Poland broke the siege. The Ottoman retreat marked the beginning of a prolonged period of military setbacks. The Great Turkish War followed. Coalitions of European powers gradually pushed the Ottoman frontier southward. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz marked a historic moment. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire permanently ceded large European territories through an international peace settlement. It represented not the collapse of the empire, but the end of its long period of expansion into Europe. The 18th century became an age of adaptation. Ottoman leaders increasingly studied developments in Europe. Diplomats reported on scientific and administrative innovations. Military reforms were discussed. Printing presses gradually appeared. New educational institutions were founded. The Tulip era symbolized a growing curiosity about art, architecture, and intellectual exchange, although social tensions eventually brought that period to an end. Meanwhile, Russia emerged as the empire's greatest long-term geopolitical rival. Repeated Russo-Ottoman wars reshaped the northern Black Sea region. The Treaty of Kukuk-Kainarka in 1774 proved especially significant. It weakened Ottoman influence, increased Russian prestige, and granted Russia new diplomatic rights concerning Orthodox Christians within Ottoman territory. Recognizing the need for deeper reform, Sultan Selim III attempted to modernize the army and administration through the New Order reforms. European military methods were introduced. New schools were established. Administrative structures were reorganized. Resistance proved fierce. Powerful interest groups, especially within the Janissaries, opposed many of these changes. Selim III was overthrown and later killed. His successor, Mehmed II, concluded that meaningful reform could not succeed while the Janissaries retained their political power. In 1826, during what became known as the Auspicious Incident, the Janissary Corps was abolished after a violent confrontation. It was one of the most dramatic institutional changes in Ottoman history. A military organization that had served the empire for centuries disappeared, replaced by a modern army organized along European lines. Mehmed II also reformed provincial administration, expanded education, modernized government ministries, and strengthened central authority. Yet external pressures continued mounting. Nationalism spread across Europe and into the Ottoman Balkans. The Greek War of Independence led to the creation of an independent Greek state. Elsewhere, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and other regions gradually sought greater autonomy or independence. At the same time, European industrialization accelerated. Economic competition intensified. Foreign loans increased Ottoman financial dependence. During the 19th century, the Tanzimat reforms represented one of the empire's most ambitious attempts at renewal. New legal codes were introduced. Provincial government was reorganized. Educational systems expanded. Equal legal protections for subjects of different religions were increasingly emphasized. Railways, telegraphs, and modern bureaucratic institutions connected the empire more closely than ever before. These reforms reflected genuine efforts to adapt. They also revealed the immense complexity of governing a multi-ethnic and multi-religious empire during an age increasingly shaped by nationalism. Some communities welcomed reform. Others believed it did not go far enough. Still others feared that change threatened established traditions. No single policy could satisfy every expectation. Under Sultan Abdulhamid II, the empire pursued modernization while simultaneously strengthening centralized rule. Railways extended across the Middle East, including the Hejaz Railway linking Damascus toward Medina. Schools expanded. Communications improved. Yet political opposition also grew. Reformers known as the Young Turks demanded constitutional government and greater political participation. In 1908, the Constitution was restored. Parliament reconvened. The empire briefly entered a new constitutional era. Soon afterward, however, the Balkan Wars dealt devastating blows to Ottoman territory in Europe. Nearly all remaining European provinces outside eastern Thrace were lost. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim refugees fled toward Anatolia, profoundly changing the empire's demographic landscape. Then came the First World War. The Ottoman government entered the conflict alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary. Leaders hoped to recover lost influence and defend the empire against expanding rival powers. Instead, the war exhausted the state. The Gallipoli campaign demonstrated remarkable Ottoman resistance and elevated commanders, such as Mustafa Kemal, to international prominence. Elsewhere, however, defeats accumulated. British forces advanced through Mesopotamia and Palestine. The Arab Revolt challenged Ottoman rule in the Hejaz. The Eastern Front witnessed immense suffering, including the deportation and mass killing of Armenians in 1915. The overwhelming consensus among historians recognizes these events as the Armenian Genocide, one of the greatest human tragedies of the 20th century. By 1918, the empire could no longer continue the war. The Armistice of Mudros ended Ottoman participation. Allied occupation followed. The proposed Treaty of Sèvres envisioned partitioning much of the remaining empire. Many believed the Ottoman state had reached its final end. Instead, a new movement emerged in Anatolia under Mustafa Kemal. Rejecting partition, Turkish nationalists organized resistance against foreign occupation in the terms of the proposed settlement. The Turkish War of Independence fundamentally reshaped the region. In 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished. Sultan Mehmed II departed Istanbul. More than 6 centuries of dynastic rule came to an end. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 recognized the sovereignty of the new Republic of Turkey. The following year, in 1924, the Ottoman Caliphate was also abolished. The institutions that had defined the Ottoman state for centuries formally disappeared. Yet the empire's influence did not vanish with its political institutions. For over 600 years, the Ottomans had connected Europe, Asia, and Africa through trade, diplomacy, scholarship, architecture, and law. Cities such as Istanbul, Sarajevo, Jerusalem, Cairo, Damascus, Thessaloniki, and countless others still bear the marks of Ottoman administration and culture. Mosques, bridges, markets, schools, caravanserais, and fortresses built during Ottoman rule continue to shape the landscapes of multiple modern countries. The empire governed extraordinary diversity. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived under its authority. Dozens of languages were spoken across its provinces. Its history included periods of remarkable prosperity, significant cultural achievement, administrative innovation, military success, political conflict, reform, and decline. Its story cannot be reduced to a simple narrative of rise and fall. Instead, it was the story of a state that continually adapted to changing circumstances for more than 6 centuries. It survived civil wars, invasions, succession crises, economic transformations, technological change, and shifting global balances of power. At times it expanded with astonishing speed. At other moments it struggled to reform itself in a rapidly changing world. The Ottoman Empire eventually disappeared as a political entity, but its legacy remains deeply woven into the history of southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Modern borders, legal traditions, architecture, cuisine, language, and cultural memory across a vast region still reflect centuries of Ottoman influence. From a small frontier principality on the edge of a declining empire to one of the longest-lasting imperial states in world history, the Ottoman Empire left a legacy that continues to shape the modern world long after its final sultan departed the palace in Istanbul. Its history remains not only a record of conquest and government, but also a reminder of how societies evolve, how institutions adapt, and how the decisions of successive generations can shape the course of centuries. The empire came to an end. Its history did not.